Hello, ladies and gentlemen. How's it going? It's Michael Parker, and welcome back. Today is the 50th episode of Michael Parker Media. I'm very pleased and proud of that. And our guest today, this is going to be interesting because it's been a hell of a week in America. So we're going to talk about America today, and in particular, unseen America. Our guest today is photographer and author Peter Guttman. He is the author of 9 books. His latest is this one right here, which is American Character. And I love the rest of the title, Surprising Portraits of an Unseen Nation. When I saw Unseen Nation, I was like, yep, let's talk to this person. Peter has been called one of the 20 of the world's most influential photographers. That's pretty high praise. Last year, he joined the ranks of Jacques Cousteau and Buzz Aldrin as a fellow of the Explorers Club, requiring substantial contributions to mankind's geographical knowledge. Peter, congratulations on the new book. Congratulations on the accolades, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so very much, Michael. It's great to be here.
Yeah, the book, what came out at the end of October, just like 2 weeks ago or something.
October 29th, just about a week before the elections.
And I just received my copy. Actually, I received it on Election Day, and I was really excited to get it. I've been perusing it. I watched your TED Talk. I sense a kindred spirit in you. So before we get to the book, I want to talk about you. Now, were you born in Roswell, New Mexico?
I was born in Roswell, New Mexico, in the very same hospital where reputedly they had done the alien autopsies back in 1947. Called the Walker Air Force Base.
Yeah, that is an auspicious birthplace, and I think it kind of sets you up for what you went on to do. Now, as a child, you were a gifted child. Your artwork was exhibited at the Lever House in New York City at 5 years old. At 12, you were engaged in medical research, contributing ideas for the development of an artificial heart?
Yes, that's correct. I was a bit of a nerdy kid when I was young, and I had corresponded with the medical pioneers of the time, Michael DeBakey, Willem Kalf, who was the inventor of the artificial kidney, and he later went on to head up the Department of Artificial Organs in Salt Lake City after leaving the Cleveland Clinic. He was the guy that hired Robert Jarvik, which is a name some people may know, the Jarvik heart. And he invited me to his laboratory. I spent some time with him. I continued corresponding with other renowned pioneers in the field at the time. And Dr. Kalf actually invited me to start working with him in his lab at a very early age. And I decided instead I should finish up my college degree. And at the insanely young age of 19, I had my very first midlife crisis, at which point I realized that the world was too wide and expansive for me to be engaging in something as narrow, noble nonetheless, as medical research. But I knew I needed to encounter as many experiences in my lifetime as possible. And consequently, I shifted to getting a degree in geography.
As I was reading that and listening to you speak in your TED Talk, I was wondering if in your mind you already envisioned yourself really as a photographer.
I envisioned myself as an artist. Originally, I had always been doing artwork, and to accommodate my medical interests, I went into medical illustration, which then made my art much more realistic. But I also realized I would never really want to part with my artwork, and I could never earn a living in that way. And so that kind of morphed into photography. When I graduated from college, I became a tour guide that generally enabled me to both enhance my speaking skills and learn in a much more intense manner all about our own country. I was leading trips on a motor coach throughout the United States and North America for trips that lasted between 3 days and 30 days with the same 45 or so people, if you can imagine that, for that time.
I can absolutely imagine that, because in the last 3 years, I've been on 3 of those tours abroad, Egypt and then Turkey, and just recently to Peru. So I've been in those motor coaches listening to a person like you and thoroughly enjoying it.
I always get a kick out of seeing any film that includes tour guiding or tours. I just saw a Real Pain, which I think is a great movie, and that had a pretty amusing interlude regarding a tour group.
In your TED Talk, you talk a lot about time and our finite amount of it that we get as humans. And that made me think, as a photographer, are you a run and gun kind of guy? Or back in the day, did you spend a lot of time setting up your shots? What is your modus operandi typically?
Well, firstly, it's true that I've seen time as sort of the number one challenge in life, as our most valuable natural resource, and the one thing that will absolutely be depleted at some point. And so I've tried to stuff as many experiences as I can into this one lifespan, which has sort of been my way of trying to cheat Mother Nature. And my photography has been an extension of that philosophy. And I've been kind of trying to chew on as many experiences as possible. My photography has spanned the whole range, the whole spectrum between things that you get on the spot, that you're lucky to find, serendipitous encounters and moments, and also include kind of conceptual visionary setups that kind of was the centerpiece of my TED Talk about the photograph I took of a snowman that I constructed in front of a total solar eclipse. And it was that image that got me my first appointment with National Geographic.
I found that interesting that you wanted to take this photo of a solar eclipse. And you also mentioned that I'm a space nerd as well, and you were interested in the solar system and the world at large.
Yeah, when I was young, I was mapping out all the little reports that came back from Mariner and the original spacecraft that were sent out to explore other planets in our solar system. I would attempt to, before I got into photography, to actually paint different sunsets, and always was sort of mystified by the varying patterns and colorations of the sky that this one blank canvas could create so many incredible textures and vibrant colors. And so, yeah, I've always had an interest in the solar system, in the space travel, astronauts. There was a time when I could have named by heart every single manned space flight into outer space. But I think by now it's so commonplace that that's no longer the case.
I wish it was more commonplace. Like yourself, we are similar ages. I also watched the men walk on the moon as a child. And when I saw that at a really young age, it really made my imagination expand a great deal. And I wish we were back on the moon now.
Yeah, it's funny. I also wrote to Neil Armstrong asking if he could send me his autograph. And I later learned that he stopped giving autographs out, but he did send me his autograph on a small little index card, which my mom mistakenly threw out. And I made her life so miserable that she actually then had to write back to Neil Armstrong again and beg him to send something back, or it was going to tear our family apart. And so he did. And this time it wasn't on a blank card, but it was like on the back of a full color photograph of him. So thanks to my mom's quick actions, she was able to remedy that family tension.
You also speak about when you first, after that first photo got picked up and you began to get more and more assignments, you were kind of known for your unique perspective. And that phrase caught my ear because there's the unique perspective in a literal sense, and then there's the unique perspective in the more spiritual or intellectual respect. But let's talk just about the literal. So back in the day, before there were drones and GoPros and things like that, how were you getting photos back then?
So I often would use a tripod as a fishing rod, in which I would have my camera attached with the focus set preset and the exposure preset, and would, let's say I was on a moving train, I'd be leaning out the window with the tripod fully extended and aiming back toward the train itself. So you get the whooshing blurring of the landscapes with the more steady vision of the train itself, which created almost never before seen types of imagery in still photography. I would use a tripod. I would use various clamping paraphernalia to clamp my camera onto the wings of a fixed wing aircraft to shoot back toward the open door where I might be sitting, or at the top of a wind yacht in the Mojave Desert looking down as it sped along the pancake flat playa of these dry lakes. And I continued to try to find new ways to express myself from the standpoint of perspectives. And it's somewhat ironic that my son, who it seems has sort of followed in my footsteps, actually was one of the first authors to create a book solely of drone photography. And he has recently won an Emmy for drone videography. I'm proud of the fact that I've been in some ways instrumental in the path he's taken, but it's so amazing and creates a wee bit of jealousy that he's been able to more effortlessly create these extraordinary perspectives that I could only kind of grasp at prior to the onset of drones.
When this crossed my desk a couple of weeks ago, just the phrase unseen nation, I was like, you know what? I'm in. What does unseen nation mean to you?
Well, so many of us in our modern day societies, we live inside our individual bubbles and really cannot imagine at all how strikingly different other people's lives are in other sections of the country. This particularly goes for urban dwellers not being much familiar with rural ways of life, but I've also seen the stereotype notions that rural dwellers have of people that live in the city.
Absolutely.
So I have always been fascinated by the extraordinary diversity of ethnicities, religions, occupations, philosophies that all exist within one country. And America is probably one of the greatest repositories of this extraordinary spectrum. I mean, for one, as a result of it having, I think, the greatest variety of geographical landscapes in the world, in the whole world. No other country has mountains and deserts and tundra and glaciers and Everglades, dunes. It's quite astonishing the variety of landscapes that can be found in this country. And those landscapes have gone on to be the device by which people sorted themselves out after, for the most part, coming from other countries to join the native people that were living here before immigration ever started. My whole life, I've been so excited by this extraordinarily colorful spectrum. That was reflected in my international travels that I've done. I've traveled to 255 countries and territories around the world on all 7 continents. And while exploring a lot of the indigenous people, it really helped in my own mind to better understand how incredible our own diversity is here at home.
I understand that and I applaud that. And I had this epiphany on my own just a couple of months ago, and I mentioned it to my wife. It's one of those things what I hadn't really thought about. And that is that 4 of my closest friends in my life at this time, it just dawned on me. I'm like, they are all photographers or videographers or both. And I realized it's like, one reason I think that I enjoy the company of these 4 people so much is that to me, photographers retain and embody a sense of awe and wonder about the world and the universe.
Yeah, I think that is something that we all should aspire to do, because it's the wonder of life and curiosity that really helps both keep us young, keep us exploring, keep us trying to understand how we can create a better society for mankind. And I like to think that really curiosity is probably one of the greatest attributes one can have in life. My favorite invention during my lifetime is actually Google, because it enables me to pander to this thirst for learning more and for understanding more.
Well, that's an interesting thought. And you're right. Just a moment ago, you were talking about this how geography sometimes affects what people do with their lives. And one of the things that I like that you celebrate about the rugged individuals that make up America, for example, there's jobs that exist out there that I don't think many of us would even know exist. This gentleman on the cover, and I'll put a better photo of that in the video. He is an eel trapper.
Yes.
Talk about this? This man is in, I believe, upstate New York. What is it that he's doing here, and why is he doing this?
His name's Ray Turner, and he is the classic iconoclast. He basically decided he was going to live off the grid.
Yes.
He has a little stone cabin on the edge of the burbling Delaware River near Hancock, New York. And every year, after the Delaware River sometimes freezes and has ice come careening down the stream, he rebuilds a giant eel weir. A weir is a trap, and it is kind of like a V-shaped stone channel that kind of funnels fish or eels in through a particularly narrow passageway. And right near the edge of this V-shaped stone channel, he builds this wooden contraption that's multi-stage, multi-leveled, that will trap an immensity of eels. He knows exactly when these eels will be migrating down. They are catadromous fish, a fancy word for the movements of these fish from their inland regions near the river all the way out to sea, where they will eventually die out in the Sargasso Sea. But in September, after a big rain and a full moon, thousands of these eels will come flooding down the channels of the Delaware River, and they wind up inside the eel trap. And he will then come with his canoe, and it'll come with two canoes, one that he's paddling in, and the other in which he kind of shovels all these eels into this second canoe and will bring it back down to his stone cottage where he has an adjoining smokehouse. And then he smokes the eels and sells them. And as a matter of fact, he has been extremely successful in his business, and some of his delicacies have been featured in Gourmet magazine. And people now come from around the world to visit him, but you can imagine prior to the internet, when you couldn't Google anything like that, you really had to only learn about this from word of mouth. So I was very fortunate that I found him long before, others beat a path to his door.
This book is several decades in the making, and you have found all these people that, they either have these unusual occupations. I mean, I had never heard of what he did. I mean, I don't even think about eels being in fresh water, but clearly I just didn't know. But there's so many people that have these jobs, and the jobs are reflected by the necessity of the place that they're in. And many of these people are doing these jobs. They love what they do. I think that it speaks to their sense of individualism, and you captured that. How did you hear about all these people over the decades? Was it just curiosity again, or would people come up to you and say, "Hey, well, Peter, you should go meet this guy or this woman because she does this or he does that"?
Very little of the second. I mean, I would say it was only in the last year or so that people actually knew that I was specifically keeping my eye sharply trained on unique and wild individuals. For example, Ray, that I just spoke about, the Eel Trapper, I was at a shad fest, which celebrates a fish that does a big migration on the Connecticut River. And they do these outdoor feasts with shad where they are cooked over oak planks next to a fire. And while I was waiting online to get my portion of shad, I overheard somebody, the person right in front of me online, talking about some eel trapper. And so I rudely interrupted his conversation and learned more clues about where I might be able to find him. And I followed up on it from there. But generally speaking, it's serendipity that has enabled me to come in contact with these people. Having traveled as frequently as I do, if you have an open heart and an open mind and keep your eyes open, you're going to encounter a lot of very, very unique people. Just sort of following your curiosity, the trail of your curiosity to those people helps to open up doors, and they'll introduce you to other people. And it's a mixture. So there really is no one specific methodology at all, other than letting life and its serendipitous events take me away.
It's interesting that you said open heart and open mind. You may hear that phrase towards the end of this episode. And I love the fact that you talk about these rugged individualists. Listen to some of these occupations that Peter has documented: a zinc prospector, a rattlesnake wrangler, tornado chasers, walrus hunters. I'd like to think these are my people.
Well, each one of them are so different and yeah, they can be your people if you adopt them in that manner. But like the walrus hunters, that's an extraordinarily difficult and dangerous occupation that I found on St. Lawrence Island, which sits forlornly out in the Aleutian waters of Alaska. It's really in the area where the low pressure systems of the world originate, creating all that bad weather we'll eventually come up with here on the East Coast and maybe even down where you are, I believe, in California. But this is a group of people, the Yupiks. This was a Siberian Yupik whose first language, even though he's a United States citizen, is Siberian Yupik. And they are people that live in these ramshackle wooden homes that are tilted and precariously sinking in the permafrost of St. Lawrence Island near a town called Gamble. And the image of this walrus hunter that's in the book is of him kind of huddling from the wind on land, on shore, beneath the very thin walrus skin backing of his umiak, which is a walrus hunting boat, and preparing to take it out onto the rugged waters of the Bering Sea. It's quite amazing what a lot of the indigenous people do to preserve their way of life. And in many ways, they eschew a lot of the modern conveniences that we take for granted.
Well, that's another interesting point that you bring up, because when I'm looking over your work, it seems like you do a lot of content that kind of evokes or is a memorial to a bit of a pre-digital age in some respect.
Yeah, I'm all about the pre-digital. In fact, whenever I take photographs, I'm sort of religious about making certain that there's no devices that can be seen anywhere, but also no one that has T-shirts with words on them, which essentially never existed before the 1970s. People didn't walk around as shills for corporations or bragging about where they've been or anything like that, or what their philosophies are. If you wanted to get to know them, you would speak to them, and you wouldn't be gleaning attitudes just by reading words off of a T-shirt. So in many ways, I've been fascinated by trying to preserve almost like the visual purity of a time gone by. I do that both in my international travels and also here domestically. And so I like to pay tribute to a lot of these ways of life that are quickly dying and vanishing. And while a lot of these occupations that I've featured in the books used to be commonplace, now you almost have to struggle to find the few people that still carry on these traditions.
Talk a little bit about the Rattlesnake Wranglers, because I got to be honest, that's from my neck of the woods. I know about this, but tell folks about the Rattlesnake Wranglers.
Are you originally from Texas?
West Texas, yes. I was about an hour from Sweetwater.
Oh, okay. That is your neck of the woods. Wow. Yeah. So out in these very flat scrublands of West Texas, there is, of course, this amazing rugged individualism that takes place. In fact, that really accounts for a good deal of some of the tensions we've had in our own country with regard to people's attitudes about individualism versus the common good, and these sometimes conflict with one another.
Mm-hmm.
But out near Sweetwater, they do have an annual rattlesnake roundup. And during that time, these cowboys and people that live in the area will spread out during a period of time when it's not just legal, but it's encouraged to gather as many rattlesnakes as possible, because the rattlesnakes are responsible for killing livestock and for endangering people as well. And they are collected in order to gather up their venom to provide antidotes for bites later on. And so they do have a whole festival during which time rattlesnake skins are sold, and you can eat fried rattlesnake. And they have a big feast based on the rattlesnake itself, which is a very interesting gustatorial event that I enjoyed.
And you also take photos in urban areas. I live in Los Angeles now, and one of the photos that you took are the people that go to the Day of the Dead celebration at Hollywood Forever Cemetery. You have a photo of some hip hop enthusiasts in front of Amoeba Records. And so I'm not trying to say to the audience that you only take pictures of people in rural areas. You take pictures of people across all the swaths of the United States and the world.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think that I was more interested in trying to grab a gestalt snapshot of the entire country as it exists now, and as opposed to diving into a segregated mindset. I wanted to show the entire awesome rainbow of lifestyles in our country, from urban to rural. And I think it's precisely that extraordinary range that creates a beautiful richness, but also at the same time a political tension that has really existed since the founding of our country.
Agreed. It's not necessarily a new thing. It seems more pronounced now because of electronic media.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. I mean, I like all the facets of this, but I love the underdog. I love the guy and gal who's out there kind of doing these things that nobody even knows exist. I love the fact that you are showing this to the world, because I can't remember if I said this already or not, but when I was waxing philosophical thinking about this interview, it's one of those things that most people within the United States and the world abroad are not famous. They are not celebrities, they're not sports stars, they're not politicians, they're not TikTok influencers. Most people will live their life only known to their family and friends, their coworkers, the people that they serve through their occupation, and maybe a few people on social media. And that seems like an obvious idea, but I think it's profound. And you reflect that light.
No, thank you for saying that. I think that you put it beautifully in that regard. And to try to shine a spotlight on these kind of forgotten and unseen sectors of life, I think is a very worthwhile endeavor. And at the same time, I tried to use the visuals of their particular occupations as sort of like a launching pad to delve into some of the historical and cultural background of why they are there and what the history is of what it is they've been doing. And in so trying to paint a somewhat more illustrative sense of the history of our country.
Another thing about the book that I really like, of course, your photos are fantastic, but you are an excellent writer. And I learned so much. And ladies and gentlemen, if you pick up this book, you could start anywhere, because each section is a photo and then a description of kind of what the photo is, what led to such a thing. And it's very educational. And forgive me, there's one thing that I'm forgetting, but you mentioned there is a particular kind of festival. I believe it's on the East Coast. And I was first drawn to kind of the macabre photos, but it's some type of a festival that's kind of like a pre-Lent kind of thing. And people are dressed up in kind of these spooky things. It looks a little bit like Halloween, but it's pre-Lent.
Yeah, I was worried you were going to take me to a different festival in Montana, which I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's the Testicle Festival that I won't discuss at the moment. But the festival that you're referring to is a Fastnacht festival, which is a German-inspired pre-Lenten celebration that is actually somewhat commonplace in German-speaking nations in Europe, primarily Austria, Switzerland, and Germany. And it is a symbolic way in which people will greet the departure of winter and the first budding of vegetation. And the culmination of this very macabre festival where people are dressed up in all kinds of grotesque types of handmade outfits. And mind you, this is in the deep woods of West Virginia, in the town called Helvetia, which was the original ancestral name for Switzerland. The culmination of this is a big parade in which they lead a giant effigy of Old Man Winter to a huge bonfire and throw him into the bonfire while they are chanting all manner of things designed to dispel the ills of winter and welcome in the first harbingers of spring. But it's a really unique festival. I believe it's the only one in the United States. But it's a very dazzling and charming little town in West Virginia named Helvetia where you can see it.
That was just one of many things that I learned from the book. And you don't just celebrate occupations. You also talk about people's spiritual beliefs. Maybe they have fringe beliefs. You got UFO hunters. You got Bigfoot seekers. You've got Tibetan monks. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, I was fascinated with my time spent with
Buddhist monks, I'm sorry.
Buddhist monks, yeah. I was fascinated, however, picking up on your notion of the Bigfoot seeker, who is somebody that I actually met while I was goat packing, which is something else that is actually represented in the book. You see a goat packer. And I met this gentleman named John Mayenzinski, who actually wrote the Bible on goat packing, but his real passion is trying to find Bigfoot. And he's a scientist, a full-fledged, like bona fide, serious scientist who has complete beliefs in the existence of Bigfoot. He, as I mentioned, he was known for his goat packing and wrote the Bible on it, but he also was using the goat packing itself in order to carry his heavy equipment to do field research out in the middle of wilderness in Wyoming and Utah. And one day, while in his tent, which was a pretty high tent, about 6 foot high, and he could see through it the shadow of a hand, putting its hand on top of the tent, and tried to get out in time. And there were fragments, there were footprints, there were all manner of evidence that he has been collecting since then. And National Geographic has featured him as a rather credible subject to speak to about the existence of Bigfoot. But a lot of people dispel those notions, but they're known as cryptids,
Yes.
Animals that are thought of as being fictional. And in fact, a number of cryptids have turned out to eventually be found and
Yes.
verified. The earliest one that probably most people heard of is the platypus
Yes.
that can be found down under with its duck bill and its beaver tail, and the mountain gorilla, which was until the beginning of the last century, people dispelled the notion of whether there was really such a thing as a mountain gorilla. So these things are not beyond the realm of possibility. And people are seekers, and in many cases, that's how they wound up in the United States. They were seeking things. They were seeking escape from oppression, and they wound up here in this country.
I'm glad you call them seekers. Listen, I'm kind of going to make slight jest of this. I'm pro Bigfoot. I don't know if Bigfoot exists, but I hope that Bigfoot exists, and I'm pro cryptid. And when you said seeker, I was like, that's it, because all of these questions that I like to ask on this show and what drew me to your book is just, once again, this beautiful aspect of our personality, which is curiosity and the drive to learn and know and experience.
Yeah, exactly. And being in California, and if you are a big Bigfoot fan, you could head north to the Redwood region, where there's a place called Legends of Bigfoot, which is essentially almost like a Bigfoot theme park of sorts. That's overblowing it a bit, but it's pretty colorful, and you will find a lot of carvings using chainsaws to create huge, monstrous replicas of Bigfoot. And there have been a lot of Bigfoot sightings as well in the northern woods of California.
I am an aficionado of the strange and the weird, and that's part of what drew me to your book. Now, this is your ninth book. I mean, that's a major thing. I mean, you've been doing this for decades, and I'm assuming the photos in this book, some of them may go back to much earlier in your career.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had a book like this that has spanned such an immensity of time, because I was just thinking about it the other day. The earliest photograph in this book was an image I took in 1986, and it was one of the very last Shaker people that are living. And the Shaker religion itself was a very influential religious movement of the 19th century. And at one point, there were 16 colonies, mostly on the eastern coast. They invented the flat broom, clothespins, washing machines. They were very industrious people. They were known for their furniture. And now there's only one community left, 3 people that live in it, one of whom I've recently met, but it's not the person in the book. And that image that I took back in 1986 really kind of informed me and alerted me as to the importance of documenting unique people that are like an important part of our fabric, but that may not be around too much longer. So yeah, it has spanned the decades. My images that are in this book, even though the greater majority of them have been taken in recent years. There are some from quite a while ago. If they do tell a story about our American experience, I wanted to make sure it was included in the book.
You have been to all 50 states.
I've been to all corners of all 50 states, yes.
And you had mentioned earlier that you'd been to hundreds of countries, and I'd read that in a bio as well. Are there places that you have not been to that are still on your bucket list?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Firstly, people will often say, well, there aren't 255 countries. I use a list called the Traveler's Century Club list. Mm-hmm. And on that list, for example, if you were to go, and if you were an American and all you ever did was go visit France, and then you went down to the Caribbean and you visited Martinique, then your total number of countries would be 3, as opposed to 2, because Martinique is a department of France, the way Hawaii is part of the United States. And so this list separates places that are geographically, culturally, and politically distinct from the parent country. And so, yeah, I've been to numerous lands, and there are still maybe the Traveler Century Club has, I believe, 340 countries on its list. I've been to 255. And there are places like Yemen I've been dying to go to for the last quarter of a century, but it's just been too dangerous for Americans for the most part, and I haven't been there. Or Turkmenistan in Central Asia. I tried getting there a few months ago, and my letter of invitation was denied. And I think the reason is because Vladimir Putin was going to be having a meeting in Turkmenistan with 5 other countries, and he made certain that no one that could be Googled with the word journalist nearby would get into the country. So eventually I'll get into Turkmenistan. But yeah, there are some obscure countries I haven't been in, and the curious mind wants to see it all.
Earlier, when I was looking, because I was going to ask you about the 240 countries or 250, whatever it is. And then I go on Google earlier today and something said there's only 195. So your point is well taken. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know how many countries there are, but I'm not as embarrassed now that I know that there's various opinions on the subject.
The variations are wide, because there I believe it's 195 member nations of the United Nations.
Oh, okay.
And there may be quite a number more. Like, I don't believe Switzerland is even part of that number, because they chose to not be aligned in any way with the United Nations. But there are many more sovereign countries of sorts. But yeah, it does vary widely. So no need for embarrassment.
Yeah. I was going to also ask you, just because I like the action, what was probably the most dangerous shoot you've ever done in your life? If there's one that sticks out in your mind, like, wow, I'm glad I was able to take the photo and get out safely?
Oh, there have been many, but probably the one in the book that is included in the book would probably be of the tornado chaser.
Yes.
Even though that image was not taken at any moment of imminent danger, that was of Charles Edwards, who founded something called Cloud9 Tours, which I don't believe now is in existence anymore. But he would take out people on trips to do tornado chasing, and it was my second time that I had been tornado chasing. The first time I had gotten in touch with this gentleman, Gene Moore, who Time magazine called the world's most successful tornado hunter. And when I met him at the Greyhound bus station and shook his hands, I noticed he had no hair on his arms because he explained that the day before he was standing near a barbed wire fence that lightning had hit and it singed all the hair off of his arm. But this other time that I went, I spent about 3 weeks out in Oklahoma, was the home base, and went hunting for tornadoes every day that was a possibility. And then 2 or 3 days before I was slated to head back home was when I was fortunate enough to encounter an outbreak and witness 10 tornadoes. And it was pretty frightening. I was also in the vehicle. I don't know if you ever saw the film Twister, but the end of
I know the
Twister,
film.
Okay, so I'm not talking about its sequel. I'm talking about the original one back in 1997.
I'm old. I remember it.
Yeah, so their goal at the end of the film, or the highlight, the big moment of revelation at the end, was they were finally able to intercept the heart of a tornadic path deploying scientific instrumentation. And that had never been done at the time I went out to do my second tornado chasing session. But I wound up being in the vehicle that same day, wound up deploying an instrument known as a Dilocam in the heart of a tornado, which lifted it up, and it traveled several miles to where it was eventually retrieved. And it made the first recordings of the inside of a tornado. And so I feel kind of privileged that I was part of meteorological history.
You have also had experiences underground. You have a photo of a gold miner, and I believe you've spent time in caves, correct?
Yeah, one of my books, Adventures to Imagine, Thrilling Escapes in North America, has a whole section on spelunking.
That's dangerous.
It can be. It's fairly claustrophobic, but it's something that I emerged all the better for it.
Are you a bit of an adrenaline junkie? I mean, you've done some really extraordinary things, and I think some people would be like, I'm not going to do that.
I think I've been accused of being an adrenaline junkie. I was once a guest on a television show called The God Squad, where the host was a rabbi and a priest, and they were kind of horrified about my take on how life that is not lived in a way that thrills you is a life not worth living. And I think I kind of horrified them with that, but I explained that I felt that being able to push the boundaries of your comfort zones is a rather important element of being able to grow.
I would agree with that. And I think that your book, and hopefully my show and shows and books like ours, encourage people to go places and do things. And look, a lot has already been said about us being addicted to our phones and all that. And I won't beat that dead horse, but it's true. It's like, if you have the opportunity to go out and see the world, even if it's the world that's close to you, it's worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think you're beating a dead horse. I think, and if it is dead, it needs to be beat some more, because it's kind of sad the degree to which we've retreated behind our screens and allow the very thin pleasures of electronic positive reinforcement of thumbs up and little hearts to provide us with our sense of fulfillment, when really putting down your devices and going out and experiencing things is probably the greatest way you can fulfill yourselves. And I feel that way very strongly.
One of the things that I like to do is I enjoy watching culture and people and trends and movements. And I don't want to say that I'm super nostalgic for a simpler time, but you know what? I kind of am. And I like the idea of going outdoors and seeing the world. And one of my obsessions is ancient sites and archaeology. And it's just so fulfilling to see things outside of your own city or your own little area, county, state, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, certainly around the planet, places like Petra or Machu Picchu or Lalibela in Ethiopia, these places are astonishing windows into ancient civilizations, and some of which their practices are continued on to this day. I created an app which, when the iPad came out, it was actually the iPad's very first number one best-selling travel app called Beautiful Planet HD. And
Yes.
concentrated on a lot of these mythic places around the world and the ancient civilizations that basically put their stamp on the more modern versions that were superimposed on top of it.
Peter, I tried to click through to a link. Does that app still exist? I certainly read about it.
It's no longer in the App Store, unfortunately, because I wasn't able to get it updated to the systems that would be required now. You know, the whole financial model of apps has drastically changed, and people now expect content almost for free. You
Yes, they
know,
do.
I think that was something that occurred because of Instagram, perhaps. I have mixed feelings about what that has done as well to the world of travel and some of these unique, very special places now being inundated so that people can take selfies of themselves there. You know,
And then
it,
fall off a cliff.
in some instances, like, yeah, I guess that's a Darwinian solution to it all. But on the other hand, it does help inspire people
Yes.
to learn about new things, and to that extent, I think it does serve a purpose.
Well, we're going to wind this thing down. And I literally just thought, while you were talking about that, I just thought of a question that I didn't even occur to me now. There's been so much talk about AI and AI generated art. And what I always tell people, maybe you will agree, I don't worry about it a great deal because I think that there will always be a place for people like yourself, artisans, craftsmen, who actually, I think there will be a premium on human made art and media because anybody can create an AI generated photo or video or whatever. And I'm sorry, but I always know that it was AI the second I see it. And I think that there's going to be AI fatigue. I'm not saying that there's not a place for AI in the world, but I don't worry a whole lot about human made art ever going out of style.
Well, unfortunately, not everyone is as discerning as you might be in being able to spot AI fakery. And on the other hand, yeah, I think AI does some wonderful things in certain areas of learning and knowledge, but there are some really possibly dangerous pitfalls that lie ahead. Um,
Agreed.
if there's not more care taken toward these implications of it, and yeah, I think you're right about a premium being based on things that are genuine, and I think we've seen lately, especially, how just the notion of authenticity is pretty much something that is being prized more and more by people. The authenticity of experience, the authenticity of knowledge, of facts, of awareness, of cultures. And yeah, it's something we're going to have to navigate just the way we've navigated every other new step in technology that's unexpectedly come along and has produced a few negative side effects, but has in general made life a lot more pleasurable or interesting or exciting or educational. But I take your point completely.
Well, your work is 100% authentic, and that will always, I think, be popular and find its place in the marketplace and in the hands of readers.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I appreciate that, and that's something that I particularly work hard to achieve in my work.
Peter, one of the interesting things I also read about you, and I saw a TV clip, you are somewhat famous within your community in New York for having these slideshows that a really high demand amongst all kinds of people to come to your house, your apartment, or wherever you live. You have these slideshows of your work. Is that an annual thing? Do you still do that?
Actually, that's a great question because it was a tradition that has been going on for 36 years that then was held in abeyance because of COVID. And my wife and I certainly had second thoughts about having people stuffed in a living room during the time when everyone was supposed to be social distancing. Mm-hmm. So we put that on hold, and that happened right at the moment that I wound up getting a 2-book contract with Skyhorse Publishing to create 2 new books, one of which we've been discussing here. And so it was very, very difficult to continue during this particular period of time. But indeed, I am expecting to resume that sometime in the year 2025. And National Public Radio called it one of the hottest tickets in New York City, and it's been written about 3 times in the New York Times. So I'm very proud of this event, which I like to call the very first social media networking, because it was a real get-together of unique people that got to look and hear about amazing experiences.
I love your exuberance for what you do, and I love the fact that you want to share it with people, not only through a book, but firsthand in your home. That speaks volumes.
It's been quite an exciting time. We would have as many as 6 showings during the year, usually all in the winter, and cramming as many as about 80 people in the living room each time. So sometimes up to about 500 people per year would watch these slideshows that were all taken from the various adventures I had during the preceding year, ranging from Indiana Jones style, very exotic adventures to things that could be found in your own neighborhood or backyard. And in many ways, I think it opened people's eyes up to the incredible opportunities they have all around them that they may have been taking for granted for far too long.
Peter, I'm going to put all the links to the book and to your website and social media in the description of this episode. And I really appreciate you taking the time today, and best of luck, continued luck to you.
Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate it. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you appreciate what we do here on the show, I would love it if you could share this episode and with your family, friends, give us a thumbs up, give us a like, give us the heart, give us whatever. It helps me out. It helps me with the algorithm. And as Peter pointed out earlier, I just want to leave you with this thought. Keep your heart and your minds open.